It's Monday, so that means it's a new week to talk about some stuff. So we missed Friday. I figured I'd bring you
hmm
right immediately before I launch on my story because we missed Friday. It's my fault for not having good internet sussed out ahead of time. So now everyone will have to wonder for the rest of their life what the relationship between Thomas Merton and Ernesto Cardinal was.
Yeah, because they can't just Google it.
I mean, I think we were biologically evolved to be like auditory learners, like the ancient storytellers kind of thing, like where they have storytellers come and reading it's just not the same. No.
It's
You
true.
just Google that. It's hard to find it just by Googling, but if you're there's just two levels of research down to find the story, probably. So anyone who's really curious, check it out. Maybe I'll slip it in one of these other days somehow. But I'm going to tell my story now, which is the part two of that story where I was arrested and felt compassion towards that cop. Well, so we got brought back to the holding cell, and it was just full of people, like very cramped, and it's just like I'd never been arrested before, so like the idea of like a little toilet that everyone can just look at anybody who's sitting, like everyone in the room could just sit there and look at the guy who's taking a dump if he needs to take a dump. So no one did anything besides pee during that like 8 or 9 hours that I was in jail. But um, this is where it gets kind of interesting, like the dynamics that I was noticing. There, almost everyone was there for some sort of like possession of a little bit of pot, like that kind of low level thing.
Yeah.
I was there for wiping fake blood on a federal courthouse. And then there was a dude from the suburbs who was upset because he had made it all the way home. And then the police got him like when he was already outside of his car after he'd parked his car for a DUI. And so he's like, well, that doesn't make sense. I already made it home. So he's like, and then just the whole time he was loudly complaining about the injustice of it all. And everyone else is like, we're just here for like a little bit of pot. And you could
hmm
have killed someone, you fucker. Like that kind of a thing.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. And I'm sitting there and having this conversation with all these men. This is interesting to know that like there's still a chance, knowing what I'd be put in with if I was arrested and they decided to put me with the men makes me not really
hmm
as eager to get arrested as maybe I would have been in the past. Something I have to figure out
Yeah,
still.
I feel that.
But this guy was brought in who was arrested for they found him sleeping in like the bus depot. So not really like anything, just something sad, not something criminal.
hmm
And he started shaking a little bit and was like having some diabetic stuff. And he wanted his, like everyone else, when we came in, we got like a really shitty bologna sandwich that's just Wonder Bread, and then the bologna that's a little too thick with no mayo, and then an apple. That's what you got. And so this guy's like, where's my apple? I needed some because I don't have my stuff with me. And the guard guy, who was like, it's like out of a bad movie, was chewing tobacco and spitting it into a Dixie cup. And he kind of
Of
came to the doors
course.
like, it's like he'll be okay. And this guy was kind of going into some kind of having some sort of physiological episode.
hmm
And all of the men besides the dude who was, you know, DUI guy was like saying, "Come on, you fuckers, give the man you know what? The apples are down the hall. Go grab one." And the guy would spit into a cup and kind of look in and kind of laugh about it. So this man who was like his crime is sleeping in the bus depot, like started grabbing like this crusts because some people when they eat their sandwiches rip the crusts off and just throw them on the floor. He started eating the crusts off the floor in the jail cell, which is crammed with stinky, smelly people, and was
hmm
just eating the crust, and everyone was kind of freaking out, like, "What the fuck is this? This is totally inhumane." And the DUI guy's complaining over in the corner, and I was just like, and then the guy was spitting no cup. It was like this little tableau of shittiness. And in that moment, I was like this is like the closest thing to Eucharist that I can imagine existing naturally in the world. Like this guy's eating his bread and everyone's kind of like screaming at the people in power just to let the fucker have his apple.
Yeah.
And and this is kind of why I bring the story up, to frame this whole concept of compassion. Like we're going to talk about this week about the difference between compassion, as most people think about it, and charity and solidarity. Because in that moment, there's a bunch of people who had no agency and power, just trying to scream at the one guy who could just give some sort of remedy to a situation, and he was mockingly spitting, into a cup.
Mm-hmm.
There's such a metaphor right there. I don't tell that story very often. It's such a metaphor for kind of what society is like and what oppression looks like and all kinds of things.
Yeah.
So just so everyone knows, just to pivot from that friendly, that very nice, polite story, tomorrow is Giving Tuesday, which is probably the big fundraising day.
It's the big fundraising day.
It is. And I tend to be irritated by Giving Tuesday because I'll get all the emails and people get emails from us. It's fundraising season. We're trying to raise money. But like, if you value the stuff we do, visit our website and take a look at the things we're doing. And we're trying to raise $20,000 by the end of the year, plus 25 new kind of regular donors. So we invite people to consider being a part of that. Also, I think maybe we can do this through the CPI page, but like Facebook also has their own fundraising mechanism, and they do a lot of matching stuff for like people giving earlier in the day. And there's always the conspiracies that go around that somehow Facebook writes it off in their taxes or something. That's not. It's kind of pretty straightforward. They're just trying to build like a platform and want people to get sucked into using everything through them. There's no, they don't take a cut of anything. It's just all a way for them to put their fingers more into our lives. But they do have some matching funds. So look for those too. We'll add that to our total, which is on GoFundMe, of how we're doing with our goal.
Yeah.
So commercial done.
We'll have another one at the end.
Yeah. So, and feel free to leave your questions or comments, everyone. The thing about that experience that was surprising to me is, one, I was treated the best out of anybody in that cell, because they all knew
you
I
had
was there.
your clergy stuff on too.
We were all dressed in orange at that point, but they all knew, because like people want to know why you're in there. And so I told them, and they're like, fuck. So everyone was very nice to me. But yeah, no one was in there for any good reason except for DUI guy.
Yeah.
It was pretty fascinating to know that people weren't able to go to work because they were just caught with like a little bit of pot. It's so dumb.
I mean, that kind of seems like how our justice system works in general. There's like one person in a lot that is locked up, and just I don't know. If people haven't done research into our justice system and like the war on drugs and how that is actually just entirely fucked up, go do it. There's another Google search for you today.
Yeah, and no surprise here, but most of the folks that were in the cell were not white. And the thing that people would look at, this is kind of, I remember growing up thinking like dumb, horrible thoughts that are very, they're still very prevalent as sort of talking points, that I didn't think I was racist. I just thought white culture was better than black culture. Like I talk about it that way. So it wasn't about skin, it would be about culture. Kind of a weird thing. And so this whole idea of I was aware of how I would have looked at this as a young person. It's like, well, of course there's all these people of color because they do the criminal stuff. The reality is, like, if you listen to all these men's stories, it's like what you'd expect. They were kind of like, the cops kind of like think, oh, I'm going to go troll that area and like kind of look for that some reason this guy is doing something. Kind of like with police, like people do pot in the suburbs. White people do a lot of pot, like
a lot,
but they're not usually getting picked up on it. Cops aren't like trolling like the parking lot of Bed Bath and Beyond looking for infractions. Like they are at certain other parts of the city.
Yeah, generally speaking.
Yeah. Hey, Brianna. Hope you had a good
Hey,
Thanksgiving.
Brianna.
Yeah, and so
Brianna is Canadian. She doesn't do Thanksgiving.
That's
American
right. They do it all on a different day. I get confused. I think everyone who speaks English is just American. Even the British ones, they're just funny Americans. Yeah, I don't want to go too much into the actual topic itself because I want to save that for Wednesday. But it's interesting how people will divorce compassion from justice. Just as a theme. But also kind of still link justice. They'll think of compassion as doing charity and as a basic nice thing, and that everyone gets some of it. But that anything like justice, you kind of have to earn. So the idea of someone so if you're walking on the street and you get picked up and thrown in jail for having like a dime bag or whatever, and you miss work, then the people who kind of make that split might say, well, they kind of earned that. So anything bad that happens, if they end up on the street because they lose their job, like I'll feed them some food because I want to be a nice person. But other than that, if they die, they should die on their own time. Like they don't get justice because of how meritocracy is structured in our imaginations and how it applies. Brianna wants to know how our Thanksgivings were. What did you do for Thanksgiving? Did you eat anything special?
We had a vegetarian Thanksgiving. We didn't make all the food that we were planning on making because we had enough food for the number of people there already. And we ate a little bit early, and I fell asleep at like 5:30 on the dog bed in the living room, and woke up at like 6:30, and my partner was like, I'm really tired. I think I want to go to bed. And we went to bed. We were all in bed by like 7.
Wow. Without even having
just
the tryptophan from turkey.
Oh yeah. But I got a good night's sleep and woke up and had a really nice day the next day and got a Christmas tree and stuff like that. So we just apparently were exhausted and really needed like 13 hours of sleep.
Nice. I had the usual Thanksgiving foods, but I made a crab and wild mushroom cheesecake, which
you were talking about that.
So you spread that on some toast and it's tasty. But it's like I made half the recipe thinking like because I made a one-time like 20 some years ago, and I thought I'll make that, but it was so much, so I'll make half the recipe, and it was still too much. Like because it's not like eating a big piece of cheesecake with some cherries on it or something. It's kind of like a dip that you spread, and a little goes a long way. So we weren't able to finish it. So some of it went into the trash, and that's sad. Yeah. So this so back to the theme of compassion.
Back to compassion.
Yeah, like when to me, this is one of those areas where there's so many myths tied to how we operate and do compassion that we don't interrogate. So the idea of the individual versus the collective comes into play. Like, so we think of compassion as I feel bad, and so then I'm going to be nice to this other person in some kind of way, or if it stays even locked into just a feeling. Compassion is just like kind of like pity. You think of it as kind of just like the emotion of pity, and then being able to like take the idea of compassion, or which to means to suffer with someone,
Hmm.
out of that sort of like individualistic exchange sort of way of thinking, like that the ultimate form of it is like dumping some soup from a ladle into a bowl at some sort of like homeless dinner kind of thing. Uh, that's kind of like people don't really want to think beyond that. Beyond that's politics, and that church do the compassion thing and
Hmm.
stay out of the politics thing. And so then our whole theological imaginations, or all of our spirituality and understanding of it, is locked into that sort of very interpersonal sort of exchange, which sucks because then we're not able to actually be prophetic in the world if that's our way
Hmm.
of thinking about things.
And uh, like to me, it's interesting because like there is a theological like understanding of the word compassion that
Mm-hmm.
uh, it just doesn't exactly line up with the way that we use it today.
Mm-hmm.
Because the word that gets translated as compassion really kind of means like more of like acting out or acting in a way in which uh it's kind of like acting in a way that is outside what is deserved or what is thought to be deserved, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
um Whereas like mercy is mercy is not acting on a judgment or something whenever it's used in legal terms uh in the Bible. So like God's mercy is like God's mercy is um like the idea that there's like consequences from breaking the law, uh and God having mercy is God saying okay, and moving on. Like
Mm-hmm.
that's what mercy is. But then compassion is like taking that extra step and like working in favor of like making things right
Mm-hmm.
after the fact. um so it's like I don't know, it's a little different. It's a little different than
Mm-hmm.
we think of it. Like we think of compassion of we. I mean, honestly, it feels like we think of compassion. Like it, compassion. It ends up being what we call white saviorism. A lot of times, it's what we basically what we use whenever we think that we're better than the person that we're helping. But because I have compassion, I'm going to come down to help them because I'm so much better than them. Um, and I know that like that's not necessarily the feeling that we have, like that big headedness, but that's really what it comes down to whenever it's acted out. And not to say that, not to say you don't. Like if you are in a place of like where you have benefited from society and like don't stop helping people. That's not what I'm saying at all.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, it just compassion has so much more to it than just that. The idea of I go down to this lowly person to help them. Um, it's just there's more to
Mm-hmm. There's more
it.
to it. Well, and just
Yeah.
even that downward, like thinking about the how downwardness, that sort of condescension, is baked into a lot of people's theology. Because we then
Hmm.
we think of God as the top, the
Hmm.
most of, like, so the tip of the pyramid, and condescends down, and so then the incarnation is lofty God, something like an emperor of the universe,
Yeah.
coming down to the lowly estate of in the manger, and that we kind of like unreflectively kind of like port that way of thinking onto our own social structures,
Yeah.
where we think that people at the top are more deserved and the people at the bottom need but Jesus is really like, if we flip all that and think, well, no, um, God isn't, whatever we think of as God or the Spirit isn't kind of a condescending coming down like the rich to the poor. It is, God is somehow bubbles up. That kind,
Hmm.
like the reason that God is present among the oppressed in those, like, isn't because he's a powerful person who feels like shit. It's that because somehow there's some way in which those people are more godlike.
Hmm.
So maybe we
And
should
there's
think about that.
there's a that's honestly like James uh, or yeah, the person whoever wrote the book of James, um, depending on what you think about authorship of the epistles, has that idea of especially of the poor. Like in the in the epistle of James, the poor are inherit the kingdom of God. And there's that verse that says that the poor this is the problem with like doing this on my phone is I use my phone to like pull Bible verses if I'm going to quote something. So I have to go from memory here. Um, but basically, the poor will inherit the kingdom that was promised to those who love God.
Hmm.
Um, and it's interesting to look in the Greek because the kingdom promised to those who love God is actually like the um it's the uh object of the verb. It's a phrase. That entire clause is a phrase. Like, and it really kind of implies that the poor, like the poor, don't even have to love God. They still inherit the kingdom that was promised to those who love God.
Hmm.
And it's an interesting little dynamic of the book of James is just the idea that I mean the poor are already there. Like it doesn't matter. They're already there. Um, and if you want to be there, then you should probably get on board with being with the poor.
Hmm. And this is, uh, a lot of people who listen to this might be like, yeah, well, this makes sense. And a lot of people would be like, um, maybe think it makes sense, but they feel kind of, eh.
Mm-hmm.
And I kind of want people to kind of sit with this and go deeper instead of assuming that they think they understand the implications of all this. Because I don't think we generally often do, because everything in our society is built upon a logic that is opposite from what James is talking about. And so we
Mm-hmm.
end up having these gaps in our thinking so that we um, think some things are more normal and okay than they maybe should be. And even
Yeah.
like little things like this is an idea that I've gotten pushback from because I like, it's an idea I find exciting that sometimes people like don't get why I'm excited about it. Um, Simone Weil isn't the only one who does this, but she really didn't like the language of rights
Mm-hmm.
because
Makes sense,
because of
actually.
what was lost about in that transaction. So she going along with her thinking about attention as the rarest and purest form of generosity, and that we have to attend to those around us, and like imagining what a just society is. A just society doesn't. If you having things depends upon the assertion of your rights, then you and it depends upon others recognizing it. And
Mm-hmm.
so they have the power to not recognize or grant you your rights. And you can only ever have them if you assert them. Whereas building a
Mm-hmm.
society around obligation, which is where a society looks at what it collectively what it owes everyone, and that we
Mm-hmm.
should be looking around for whether or not we're fulfilling our obligation to one another, reframes it entirely. And
Yeah,
in
it
our
does.
society, but it's interesting how much even in our society, the idea of something being an obligation, it's seen as negative because
Yeah.
it goes against something coming pure from because we think the arc of compassion is I notice something, I feel bad, and then part of my cathartic release is to enact upon the thing I feel bad and pity, and then I've closed the circuit. And
Mm-hmm.
so
Which
our
isn't
ability to do
which isn't real
compassion in our
compassion.
society, yeah, our ability to do compassion usually has to come from us having noticing something that makes us uncomfortable and then acting from that.
Mm-hmm.
And so if we can create a society where we don't have to pay attention to those who suffer, then we don't ever realize we're not compassionate.
Yeah.
So all these
By the
things
way,
are built
it's
into us.
capitalism.
It's capitalism really, and so many levels gets so we don't go around. Most of us in our society are not, at least not conditioned to go around to look and see who who in our society struggles, and then looking at that as a failure to fulfill our obligation. Like that's
Mm-hmm.
not generally how it's all framed.
Yeah, we normally get it framed like, well, they're in that position, they failed, which is a complete like lack of recognition for the fact that our culture or a capitalistic culture inherently exploits people to maintain to maintain the powerful, and it's always been that way. And to say like capitalism had like this point in its time where it was like the ideal is like incredibly irresponsible, because first, like, the American economy at like peak capitalism had slavery. At peak capitalism had child labor in factories. Like, um the exploitation of the oppressed and the marginalized is has always been there in capitalism. And anytime there's a step to like actually enact compassion, it gets seen as communism and socialism, which is apparently anti-American, because we believe in rights, but only rights of middle class to upper class white men, and everybody else is kind of just like little cogs in the machine.
Yeah, it's, you know, and the reason why we're told and we internalize that somehow, well, capitalism is still better than the alternatives, is because people usually appeal to several different things. One, that the individual should have the freedom to exercise and be charitable, and that if the government got out of things and we could have free market, then there's some totality of compassion that springs up from people from their overabundance because they get to do capitalism. Well, like, then everyone will kind of mostly have their needs kind of met. And if they don't, well,
Yeah,
it's because they made
yeah.
really bad choices.
Go ask Elon Musk if that works.
Elon Musk. Mm-hmm.
He's
gonna be delicious come the revolution. I'm just gonna say, seems like he eats well, and so he'll be the first rich that I eat. So
I might I don't know. I don't know if I support cannibalism even in revolution.
no, I mean, I'm not gonna actually eat the rich.
I know.
Just so anyone knows, sometimes people think that eat the rich is a literal thing, and maybe it will be. There's
No,
that new
it's not.
Timothy Chalamet. I can't remember how to pronounce his last name. He's in this new movie that everyone's praising about, like it's a cannibalistic love story. So I guess maybe after I watch that, maybe I'll be more literal with eating the
A
rich.
cannibalistic love story. I've not heard of this. I'm gonna have to Google it.
It's yeah, something. Yeah, I can't remember that off the top of my head. Something down to the bone or something. Like, it's kind of, that's the name of the thing. And it's like one of these films that defies categorization and art, like had Oscar buzz even before it was released. Timothy Chalamet, was that his name?
I don't know.
He plays Paul Atreides in the new Dune movie. Kind of a big deal. So we should do a commercial before we close out. We'll talk more about
have compassion on CPI.
Yeah, we'll talk more about compassion and solidarity and some of those themes on Wednesday, and we've already kind of started. But yeah, maybe I'll throw up the little banner thing here. So we need to raise $20,000 in fall 2020. In addition to this, we need 25 new sustaining members to commit to giving monthly through 2023. So go to prophetikimagination.org for more information. There should be a link to our GoFundMe there. We have a long way to go. We had a good start to our fundraising, but if we're going to get the rest of the way by Christmas, we need some help.
Yep.
And there, if you go to our website, there should be a link, like I said, to GoFundMe. And on that GoFundMe page is kind of a laid out 3-phase plan for where we're headed as an organization.
And if you don't want to use GoFundMe, we have our normal like year-round link. It's in the menu or at the top.
Top of the page.
Both, top of the page.
Yeah, and you can give that way, and I'll gather every new donation that comes in. I will upgrade the GoFundMe and have a tally, and then tomorrow, I don't know, maybe I'll pop on and just do a little announcement a couple times throughout the day using this just to let people know where we're at and our fundraising goals, because tomorrow is Giving Tuesday.
Yep.
So there's a good chance if you give to us on Facebook, which I will maybe post a link here below wherever this video is found. On Facebook, they'll be matching funds usually if you give early, and like straight at the top of the day. They tend to match some of those early donations, which we've made a few $100 in the past that way from the matching. So it's not. So why not?
It's not awful.
No.
Yeah.
No ethical consumption under capitalism, and no ethical donations under capitalism either, because it all has to be mediated through systems that exploit. But we do what we can, trying to build the new world in the shell of the old, as the IWW has said. So give if you can. And if you can't, we think about us, pray about us, and tell other people about our work if it matters to you.
Yes, and just share on your Facebook or Instagram or whatever.
Cool.
Yeah.
So we'll I'll probably like do some sort of like live announcement stuff tomorrow, just throughout the day. But otherwise, I'll see everyone on Wednesday.
Yeah. See ya.